We should be live. Hello, everybody, and good morning. It is a great and wonderful early Sunday morning over here in the great land of Texas. I see that Squigs is here and Grace. Good morning to both of you. Yeah, this is the first time that I'm going to be streaming without Grace being in a voice channel with me in a game or something or other in a really, really long time. So, in fact, it is just me today. As well, first things first, my name is Paladin. This is Paladin's Archives, and if you're new to the stream, welcome. This is going to be the first of many streams where I am going to talk about dungeon mastering to a very extensive degree. So, a little background on me. I, before all of this, used to work in the field of neuroscience. I did that for about seven years, and during that time, I had gotten more certifications than. Oh, I'll make sure this isn't inside out. Whoops, give me a second. I've gotten a lot of certifications in the field of neuroscience, where I got stroke certified and neuroscience certified nationally. I've been part of a national stroke and neuroscience board. There we go. You can see all the letters. I have like as many letters in my title as I do my full name. And I've been part of a national board. I helped develop the national test for stroke, and I went to international conferences for stroke, and also gave some lectures in university. All in all, to say that I'm a very smart boy. In fact, I don't think that a lot of people know this part about me, so I will show you guys a little bit of what it is that I had to study in order to pass my national neuroscience certification. So I have here a stack of 3 textbooks that I use in order to study for a 6-hour examination. So I had to have all of this memorized in order to earn the right to have just 4 letters on my name, CNRN, Certified Neuroscience Registered Nurse. I had also, at the very peak, had gotten accepted for pro ride for a PhD program for biomedical neuroscience, but since then turned it down and decided to do dungeon mastering instead. So I've been a dungeon master for 11 going on 12 years. Been doing it professional for about 2 years. And so all of that to say that I have a lot of evidence and a lot of dedication to learning and mastering disciplines and putting my head against the grindstone of finding the best ways to practice and learn as well. And so I would not have been able to get all this if I had not gotten my brain together in order to learn things that are very exceptionally difficult. And so all that to say that this Dungeon Master Academy course is going to go into nuances and niches and very deep concepts that you're probably not going to see in many. I'll say that there probably are a few places that you will see this, but not in many other communities or YouTube channels where I explore the extreme depths of what it means to master a skill fully and to its fullest potential. Dungeon mastering has a lot that a person could learn in order to master it completely. And even then, I don't think that anyone really could master every single concept that there is to game mastering. And I think that when it comes down to it, it really is the foundations and the fundamentals and a really strong base of learning that will really develop a person for the long run. It really is the basics and like the stuff they use about 80% of the time, as opposed to 20% of the time, that'll really define a game master. Now, that 20% that I'm talking about really refers more to like very deep and profound knowledge in several things. And today, I'm going to be talking about really the most extreme basics. Also, hi, Ace Trainer Geek. Welcome to the channel. I'm glad to have you here. But today I'm going to be talking about the most extreme basics that dungeon masters will probably know. And so that includes things like how to organize yourself, how to prepare for your first session, how to start building your first world, and also starting to develop and really concretely know what all the realms and different disciplines of learning there are for game mastering in and of itself, and which paths to kind of start off with so that you can really get a great wide foundation of different skills and use them in order to make your games really exceptional. And it really doesn't take a lot of work in order to raise yourself up above the bar that is good. Truth be told, that there's a lot of people that are very, very comfortable at being okay at what they do, and it only takes just a little bit of work in order to get past the majority of the people, in order to have a really good set of skills. But it takes about 100 times more work than that to get from good to great, and then about 1,000 to a million times more in order to get from great to exceptional. And so we're going to discover that whole realm on how to get from like, hey, I don't know much about DMing to, hey, like I'm going to be exceptional. And it's going to take a very long time in order to get to that point. But we're going to go through it bit by bit, week by week. And I think total amount of time, I think it'll be about a good 2 or 3 years before I finish the entire series on how it is to kind of like really expand your skills to that wide margin of a degree. I'll say that even in 12 years of DMing and kind of like following this guide more or less for myself, I wouldn't even think that I have even covered half of what there is to learn out there. And I would consider myself to be a pretty great dungeon master. If you guys have never seen my games or never been in a game with me before, there are tons that you can look at on my YouTube channel, which I am dual streaming. If those of you that are on YouTube, hello, I am able to see both chats this time, so I can see both of y'all talking at the same time. But nonetheless, let me just take a drink real quick. So let's start with the start. So why am I doing this? I think that there is an exceptional amount of knowledge that I have that I think that others could benefit from, unique views on certain things. I think that there's a lot that I've been exposed to, especially in the last 2.5 to 3 years, starting with like the world record marathons, the marathons themselves, having done this professionally as an entrepreneur in this space. I've been through both the ups and the downs, both of which offering a lot of unique perspective and insight on certain things. I published my own book. I have experimented quite widely, but I think one of the most consistent things is that I've been on here on Twitch just about weekly for about 2 years now. So I think that there's a lot that I could offer, and I think that there's a lot that people could learn from, even if you're just getting started, or if you just started getting started. I still think that a really good foundation, a really strong foundation, is something that everyone can benefit with. And so this entire first course is going to take about, well, I think somewhere around like 12 to 16, maybe 20 weeks. It really depends on how it's split up, or if I feel like some topics need to be elongated a little bit more. And then also taking questions from chat whenever they get kind of tossed my way. And so you guys can ask questions at any time. I will answer questions as they come to me, and we'll just kind of go from there. But to start from the beginning, let me go ahead and pull up my notes here so I can kind of get myself organized. So there's really 1, 2, 3, 4 main things that I'm going to talk about today. Each topic in and of itself can be talked about a lot. And so I'm only going to be touching on the basic concepts and principles of each, because anything deeper than the basic concepts is going to be a little bit too much for today. I would rather save those for later on, after people have had a much better understanding and practice on these things. If I just add everything all at once, it's going to be too much. And so today it's going to be talking about different ways that people can get organized best in order for this course, and also for getting yourself prepared for your games. the different branches of learning that people can undertake, such as disciplines, and which ones I recommend that dungeon masters kind of start out learning early. Um, how to prepare for a first session or first game as a dungeon master, and also how to create a homebrew world completely from scratch. And so those four topics, like I said, are very extensive, but it's only really covering the very basic things of each. So that way, by the end of however long I'm going to be talking, people have a really, really good general idea of what to start out with and how to get organized. So I guess before I start, does anyone want to just throw out any sort of questions for me? If not, that's okay. Just throw them out as we kind of go along, and I will start from the organizational methods. So, game mastering and world building, they're each on their own a lot of material to remember. I do consider them to be separate things. For example, I consider game mastering to be the thing that a person does in order whenever they are engaging with other people and actually participating in the game itself, right? It's a role. It's a role on a table with other people. World building doesn't necessarily need to involve other people. In fact, people can probably world build an entire setting, module, adventure, and not ever play a single session of it and just sell it to other people to run. So I do consider them to be fundamentally different things and fundamentally different practices. But they're each in and of themselves very extensive in what you do and how you get ready, or even like how to do them best. So no matter if it is game mastering online, in person, or you're world building an entire setting, or just a small one shot that you're just doing for you and your friends, we're going to take a deep dive through the theater of the ages, and we're going to need a very, very, very good central form of organization in order to keep all of this information in one spot, because the topics that I'm going to talk about are truly going to be very wide and expansive, and you're gonna need things that are going to be able to organize lists for references, idea generation, and also the things that are going on week to week in your game mastering career, in order to keep track of all that information in a one unified system of organization that works for you. So this entire system that I'm going to be showing you all here in a minute is based on subcategories, quite a lot of them. And so I am the type of person that likes to think about things almost like folders. That's something that's really worked out for me. This belongs here. If there's more than one, you subcategorize it even more. If there's more subcategories, just keep subcategorizing until you kind of like break things down into their fundamental different systems. And so what I mean more concretely is making a system that looks kind of like this. Oop. Oh, wait, if only you could see it. There we go. So here is what I typically mean or use by a system that is based on categories upon categories upon categories. There is quite a lot of information that I have to keep up with on a week-to-week basis. And so this kind of organization system really makes it so that I can keep up with my week-to-week tasks while also still building on fundamentals without it all kind of bleeding together. I can keep it apart. And so there's three main systems or three main softwares that really make this possible. The first one is Obsidian. Obsidian is really, really, really great. In fact, I will show you guys a little bit of what Obsidian looks like. So that way you can kind of get a sneak peek of what Obsidian is. Let me just pull it up here. So, bam, bammo, there we go. So this is what Obsidian looks like. It is a software that is made in order to organize your thoughts in a very concrete way. So pages is Markdown. I'm able to click on like table of contents and it'll take me back to table of contents. Or I can also link everything together using Markdown. It works really well. It works really fast as well. And You also get a really good branching view of how things kind of connect together, especially ideas. And so it works really well for making loose connections together and kind of formulating a strong basis of information that works well together. And it also is a really good way to organize a lot of the things that we're going to talk about in this series. So let me turn it back. Oop. Get rid of that. Okay. Now, whenever it comes to Obsidian, it is best known as a personal knowledge base and note-taking software that operates on Markdown, right? It allows users to make internal links for notes and then to visualize the concept as a graph, kind of like as you saw with the different points. The pros about it are it's very flexible, and I can use it to organize information very quickly, and I can link stuff together in very high speed. I can develop and redevelop my systems upon systems to fit my needs very quickly. And also, it's got a lot of things that other software don't have. For example, I can tag my notes, so I can search for all my game mastery notes. I can tag it if I want to search for a specific campaign that I'm running. I could tag it by that campaign name and quickly search them all up. Now, some cons about it is that it is one of those systems that does require a lot of effort in order to set up what is there. And then whenever things are needed to be reorganized because things just get too complex, it does require a lot of time to go through and just reformulate everything. It's also a very bad system to use if your intention is to be as simple as possible. Because it is a lot to keep up with, not to mention the technological climb that it is in order to kind of learn the system as well as keep up with it and build it over time, because there's a lot more that can be done with it, including coding and plugins that people can learn in order to make their Obsidian work really, really, really well. But that is a very large climb for some people. It also requires that the user dedicate to thinking in a non-linear way. And this isn't something that people are very used to. Thinking non-linearly requires a lot of practice, requires a lot of critical thinking, and it's something that could take some people years in order to develop. But it is worth the effort, because then you can get two different concepts or ideas and then put them together in order to make something new, which is a skill that I think is very useful for dungeon masters to have. And it is something that can be done, but it requires practice. Another con is that, like I said, it requires a lot of time setting up and and it also saves your information locally. So it doesn't save onto a like a cloud host, like OneNote or Google Drive would. You do have to like manually upload to GitHub or keep a file manually saved somewhere. And so that is, some of the cons. But overall, I think that this would work best if your intention is to have a system that you intend to use and update for an exceptionally long amount of time, years to decades, because this works as a foundation in order for you to keep everything in one spot and not lose it. Not only that, but if you make a note, you can always come back to it and add to it later, adding more to your thoughts that you had previously. So it ends up being a very living document that you can use. That also makes it really well and easy to do what we're going to be doing in this series. The other two softwares that work really well with what we're doing here is to use OneNote. I used to use OneNote until very, very recently. It's by Microsoft. It is note-taking software, and it is available as part of the Microsoft 365 suite, and has been free actually for all platforms outside of the suite. So you actually have access to it now. In fact, all three of these softwares that I'm recommending are all free, but they all have their different pros and cons. And so with this one, with OneNote, it can save information online. Great. You don't have to like upload to a database like you do with Obsidian. It's very easy. It's very easy to share things with other people. So I can create a folder. I can send that folder to someone else to look at and edit and view, so we can work on it together. You also can use it between devices like your phone, your laptop, and your desktop. It saves instantly, so you can see things go back and forth pretty well. You also can password protect your various pages and folders, and it's very flexible to use for things like writing. You can sketch on it, you can copy, you can paste. Some cons about it is that you can't really email from it. You can't email to OneNote, or sorry, to Outlook from it. Once something is deleted, it's gone forever. You don't really get to back it up or Control Z it back. It is gone, unless you have a backup. There's also a delay when sharing information between people that are using the same file, which can make it frustrating and can cause a lot of data corruption and errors. And I think the last negative thing that I've really experienced with it is that it's got some difficulty with the interface. I wouldn't recommend it to someone that has very little technological experience. It does require that people have a way of formulating and knowing how to use the different UI, which are not very easy to figure out at first. But I did use that for about a good time of about 2 years consistently, and I've been using Obsidian for about several days now. As you saw, my tree wasn't very big, and I'm currently reformulating by turning my notes from OneNote into Obsidian, as I realize that I'm going to need a much better way of connecting my thoughts and my different notes together to make this specific video series, as I'm going to be talking about things that kind of delve into extreme depths of mastery. So this video series is the whole reason why I did it. Now, the last software that I'm going to recommend is Google Drive. So Google Drive is, a lot of people know how to use Google Docs, how to use Google Sheets. The pros and cons of it is pros. A lot of people know how to use it. It's free. You get a saved space of, I think, about 24 megabytes or gigabytes, one of those, right? Free, before having to pay for more storage. You also can share things with other people, so that way they can make copies or look at the things that you make. You also can have people make copies of the things that you made for themselves, which is really great. Cons for it is that it takes an exceptional long amount of time to set up. I would say more than any of the others. You got to create the documents, you got to get the links, you got to put the links in a central spot, rinse and repeat, rinse and repeat. And that just takes a really, really long time compared to the other forms, which link stuff together in a quite speedier format. It also has no search option. You can't really search through all of your notes well at all. You would have to know what note had what, and go manually looking in each note that you make or each document that you make, rather than searching through all of your documents at the same time. And so that does make it a little difficult. And so it's a very good system for people that want something easy. And I do mean like very, very easy. If you're going to make something small and you're listening to this and you just want to learn the basics and you only want to do something really small and work out from there, then Google Drive is probably the thing for you. If you got a little bit more of a handle on technology and editing and Word editing software, that I would probably use OneNote. And if you're someone that's going to need an extremely massive, expansive way of looking at your thoughts and formulating them together, I would go with Obsidian. And so those are the 3 levels that I would use in order to formulate a really well organized system of folders to keep track of your thoughts, because you're going to want to keep track of your learning, to keep track of your goals, to keep track of your progress, and to keep track of all the things that we're going to be talking about in the next couple of videos, because you're going to want to harness as much information with as little time and effort as possible. And also, hi Line, good morning. Hope you're having a great day. Let me take a sip. Okay, so you're going to want to maximize the amount of output that you're going to get with as very little input as possible. And the more you can get information out of as little work as possible, the faster you're going to get up in your expertise and your mastery over game mastering, or really any skill. It doesn't have to be game mastery. It could be anything. Game mastering is just what we're focusing on here. But really, you can use these techniques for just about, well, anything. So with that said, let's continue on with the organizational method. I'm going to put up the picture again so you kind of get an idea of what it is that I made and explain how it works. So, really, what I had made here and what I use quite on a daily basis is a system that is based on two main concepts. The first one is that I'm able to create a system that is living. Living notes is what I call it. And so things change over time, naturally. Campaigns that I have currently are going to become campaigns of the past. Things that I read or learn are no longer going to be things that I'm going to learn, but things that I have learned. And so these need to be able to be changed between several categories, from like I did this to like it's now in the past and I've now learned this from it, or this campaign is no longer something I'm working on. I'm going to put it into my archive, which is hint hint. This is Paladin's archives. Haha. So really, we need to have a way of being able to transfer information between multiple categories and being able to add on to it over a longer period of time. Because something that might not make, that really doesn't serve anything for me now might actually become relevant again 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the road, where like as a clear example, I'm creating a book with Lion and Chaotic and Writer for Battalion or Battalia or Astalia, and I'm referencing a lot of my material from it from 2 campaigns that I've actually kept my work from, but it was about 4 to 5 years ago before I started working on it now to really start working on that material. And so I'm really glad that I saved my work from way back in the past, because now I can use it and build from it and also share it in order to make something that is really valuable to people by having a setting that people are going to love using and playing for their own games. So all I'm saying is, like, you're going to put a lot of work into what you're doing as a game master. Keep it, because you are going to be surprised how much of it you're going to use of it later, or how much you're going to want to have these things down the line. And so having living notes is a way of doing that and making sure to archive your stuff accordingly in a way so you can bring it back later. So additionally, you'll also see that there's different categories, and in fact, you're probably going to see some things repeated multiple times across multiple categories. For example, the second biggest thing that is really good about the structure is that, well, it's got a category of hierarchical structure. So you see, as I'm referencing the different things that are repeated multiple times, you'll probably see references, resources, learning, and templates in multiple locations. And so the question comes up like, well, why not just have one? Well, the thing is that for me, at least, I think best kind of putting these ideas into buckets. And so for me, what makes a lot of sense is on the very top layer, we look at under game mastering, anything that has to do with game mastering on a general sense, I would put up there. Anything that has to do going like the next one down, anything that has to do with system related game mastering, I would put there. Or anything that has to do, and so on. And so I would really just categorize my things to like as niche of a category as possible. So that way I don't all of a sudden have to look for, well, why am I reading this thing on why Florida's history is the way that it is up in just general world building? And it could be in a bit of a more niche category that really relates more to that specific campaign. I mean, I can put it on the general side, but it really clouds up having hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of notes that are all in one spot. So it's better to put them in smaller buckets that really relate to it. And I could reference it up in the general world building, but I'm going to have it in as niche of a category as I can. So that way, whenever I'm looking through things later, I'm not having to dig through basically like a sock pile on the floor. So now in terms of like what the categories mean, references are used to source or categorize very specific information from a whole source of information. So for example, on page 144 of the D&D 5e player handbook, that is the page where I go for variant equipment sizes. So I would probably want a reference for variant rules and have that in there. As a resource, which is the next category, I use that to categorize entire sources of information. such as like categorizing the entire book of the player handbook into the 5E resources for that particular system. Learning is what I use in order to put all the things that I want to learn or am learning that I've not gone through yet. And so an example would be like, let's say that I'm learning about monster ecology. So then I would put AJ Pickett's video on Dungeons and Dragons lore, aboleths, under the learning category for monster ecology. By the way, if you don't know who AJ Pickett is, he's a great, great monster ecologist. I would definitely go follow his channel because he does an exceptional job really going through all the lore from like multiple magazines so that you don't have to, and it is fantastic. Templates. So templates are things that I create or that have already been created for quick reference that I can quickly apply to a situation, to a different thing that I'm creating, a handout, schematics, flowcharts. All of those things are things that I can put into templates that I can quickly just bring out and apply to anything that I'm making, like a project or a particular game, or give to a particular player. They're things that are mostly for projects and creation, not so much in the moment, like in game, although I can bring them out. So that is what I have for an organization system. And I don't think that you necessarily have to follow that particular one like to the T. Really what makes the most sense is for you to make something that works for you. That's something that I've noticed has worked for me, at least with the way that I categorize things in my head. But whatever system you're going to use, you're going to want to use it and be consistent with it. And so you're going to really want to define, like in these cases, I'm going to do this with this information. In those cases, I'm going to do that with that information. And really putting things into their small buckets so that you can conceptualize and bring these things back faster. Because, you know, from a neuroscience scale, you know, I study neuroscience, you do a lot, you reference and you remember things a lot quicker when you can categorize them in a system along with other information that you've already kind of categorized before. And so it's a lot easier for me to remember different types of animals just by categorizing animals into that particular spot. It's going to be easier for me to categorize and recall different resources for 5e books by categorizing those into one spot. And that's how my brain, well, that's how people's brains are able to recall these things. And there's a word for it, it's called heuristics. And so heuristics are whenever your brain recalls information very quickly from situations in order to kind of get like a very quick judgment or very quick amount of information given to you so that you can make decisions in, well, a very quick fashion. And so taking advantage of the way that your brain makes heuristics is one way that you can use in order to really optimize the speed that you're going to be remembering information and using that to your greatest advantage. Because the one thing that we're using here consistently between everything is your brain, and you're going to want to maximize your brain's capability and make it easier for yourself and not harder to recall this information. So, but moving on here, let's see. That's everything I have for just an organizational system. I said a lot. Does anyone want to throw out any questions for me here while I get the next part ready? By all means, do not be afraid to ask anything you guys like, as I kind of pull out my physical goods here. Here we go. So, all right. So the next thing that I'm going to talk about is how to organize yourself so that way your resources are optimized in order to spend the least amount of time looking for things. And I do mean physical resources as opposed to digital ones. You're not always going to have your computer at hand. In fact, I do recommend highly, regardless if you're playing online or in person, to have a copy of the books. Because it's just one more thing that I can have that doesn't relate to needing a computer screen. And not only that, but you can set them up in a way in order to recall or reference information very fast without you having to go to Google and type it in and then find it and scroll and find the thing that you're looking for. So the first thing that I'm going to talk about is tabbing. So as you can see here, my player handbook has got all sorts of nice tabs, both up And well, there's only one on the side because I only need one up to this point because I've played D&D for quite a long time. As you can see, my book is all sorts of battered. In fact, I think the spine is almost coming off. I will show you my Dungeon Master's Guide because the spine has completely fallen off on that one. I've really used it that much. So knowing what your resources are and using what you have and knowing how to use them is going to be one of the things that is really going to set you apart from a lot of other people. In fact, I'll give you a hint. A lot of people don't read the Dungeon Master's Guide. A lot of people really don't spend the time to read the one thing that is made to help you DM. So, hey, if you read it, you're just that much further ahead than everyone else on how to be a great dungeon master. And as you can see, mine is all beat up to hell and it's broken. I want to get a new one, but I feel like just the class of being like, hey, look, I'm a DM. Look how much experience I have is something that, I enjoy. I really do love doing what I do. And I love creating worlds and seeing other people have fun with the things I make, which is why I do this. But anyway, back to tabbing. So it's very simple. On the top, I have all of the tabs for every single chapter that there is in the book. So if I wanted to go to, I don't know, conditions, the conditions chapter is already kind of tabbed out. So now I don't have to spend time looking through the glossary and knowing where exactly it's at. If I want to look at the races, I can't, which I know is chapter 2. Okay, there I am. If I want to go to equipment, which I know is chapter 5. There I am. And so it really makes it very, very easy for me to just, pull the tab that I need in order to kind of get to it. It's fairly easy. All I did is get some rather thick paper, folded it, measured it, stapled it, and then also put some like clear not masking tape, but clear tape around it. So that way my dirty, oily fingers don't damage the paper because that'll make it much more likely that I'll have to replace it over time. So rather have it last a long time and not have to pull the stapled tabs out of my book. And then on the side, I put the things that I'm going to reference the most that are not necessarily any one of these on that page. And I'll be honest, I only ever really reference one, my poor book. Yeah, I beat this book up to hell. Like, I don't know if you can see, like, look at the edges of it. I mean, it's got like a bunch of marks from me hitting it on things. I mean, the corners are all faded. I mean, the spine is coming off. I've stapled it. I've written on it. I love D&D, as you can tell, but my books are really not in good repair, but that's because I've used it so much. It's not an act of me abusing it. It's just that I really have handled this book a lot in the last 12 years. But the only page that I use and that I use the most is only one page, and that is the gear and adventuring page. That's the only one I ever need to reference because that's the one that people are like, hey, I want to buy this, I want to buy that, and I'm like, cool. I pull out my book. There I am. I don't use hardly any other page in this book nearly as often as I do that one, and the rest of the book I either have memorized or I have written down notes on what I need. So I hardly ever open up the rest of everything else in here unless I'm trying to make something like the Foundry database that me and Grace and many others have put together. For that, I have had to reference this, or if there's some like sort of niche rule, although most times I do prefer to look stuff up online rather than trying to spend a lot more extensive time searching through a physical copy. But nonetheless, I still do recommend having a physical copy on hand, so that way you can have tabs for the things you're going to need to reference most often, or things that maybe you don't remember. For example, jumping rules, rules on swimming, or rules on like what to do when you're on horseback, that sort of stuff. And also, if I share my other things, my monster manual is also all marked up as well. Mostly what I use is that if I don't have let's say I'm playing on Roll20, where I'm playing a game improv, and I don't have a stat block completely on hand, I've actually marked the pages for the monsters that I use most often. So I have a tab for the giants, I have a tab for hobgoblins. I have let's see what else I got in here. There's a tab here. I have a tab for the devils. Things that I like to pull out on the fly, so that way, you know, should I need to just do stuff, I can. I also have tabs on giant animals, you know, those sorts of things. The Dungeon Master's Guide, you know, I barely have any tabs on it, as I don't really use it a lot during the game, except if it's going to be for rolling random treasure, which I have a tab there. And then also I have tabs for potions, because potions come up quite a bit and I don't always have to memorize. And so I like having 8 pages of the potions tab. So that's the 2 pages that I really reference the most. In addition to, I think I got another one here. Let's see. Looks like magic item table and also XP thresholds. Wait, why did the pages move? Why they are detached from the spine? Yeah, look, I mean, I probably should just not even use it right at this point. I mean, I try to keep it together, because at least in that way, well, like, look, the pages are even like coming off the spine that I have for my DM's manual. People say I should get a new one, but I say, no, I'm keeping it. I'm crying for these poor books. Thank you. I'm glad you like the usage, the heavy usage of my books. In fact, like if I showed you the griminess on the sides of the pages, this is the player handbook. And the middle one is the monster manual, and the Dungeon Master Guide is actually the least used, despite, or at least the least handled, despite it being so broken. So, oh my god. Yep. I tell you, I've been DMing for a while, and I do use these books a lot. And I've given a lot of care to learning, and getting things really well in my head, so that way my games can be great. And I think the evidence speaks for itself. But anyway, tabbing, do it. It'll save you lots and lots and lots of time. You also can do the same thing for, hold on, I got more tabs. You also can do the same thing for your modules. Here's our Rappanathic book, for example. I have it tabbed, as you can see. I have my my monster manual in the very back is tabbed. I have tabs set for certain areas that I like to reference. For example, this is the mausoleum level, if I think that we're going to be going there. I also got the Cavern of the Kraken, right? I also put what's it called? Paper clips in here. That's another way that you can collect information together if you want to really like. The thing about the Rappanathic book is that if I put tabs for every chapter, there's going to be hundreds of tabs on here. So I use paper clips in order to kind of separate things. I don't really tab the different levels because I can just look in the front, and it's a lot better than trying to tab every single level that's in here, because there's really just that many, and it's a bit sensible for me to tab so many things back to back. I tried one time and it just didn't work, so I have to do what I can. So tabbing, do it. It'll save you a lot of time, I promise. And so the last thing that I recommend in terms of keeping yourself organized is a binder. In fact, I got quite many binders. I'm going to show them all here. I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. This is the biggest one of them all. I got a lot of binders. I make sure to organize my stuff in a way so that I can find them physically. And this doesn't even include the archive of stuff that's not in binders anymore. In fact, I also do stuff like this, where once I'm done with something like an adventure or campaign, I take everything out that's relevant for the adventure and I put it in a sleeve, so that way I can remember and keep all of the physical copies of everything that I've ever needed for that adventure. Because, like I said before, having reference material, you never know when you need it until you're like, oh man, I really wish I knew what I did exactly during that 3rd session of that campaign, and then you're like, I got it. You pull it up. I also got other ones behind me as well, such as like the Dungeon of the Mad Mage. And well, anyway, there's a lot more that I could pull up, but all that I'm trying to say is that keeping organized pays off, especially when you have a lot of things. For example, here's my Descent into Avernus that we just did recently. This entire book is Indigo Isles. But I'm going to mostly focus on, well, I can use the Descent into Avernus as a more complete example, but I will use a real example of what I use week to week. So this is my Rapid Athic book. So it doesn't quite tell because there's no cover on it, but typically what I use whenever it comes to a binder is that I use a 3-ring binder, 1.5 to 3 inches, preferably the kind that have the clasps that don't bend whenever you use them. I think you guys know the kind I'm talking about. Also, what is Grace saying? Touch of Velveture asked if there are monsters you don't use. We're just wondering, are there monsters that I don't use? Oh, I'm sorry that I missed your question. Yeah, let me see. So I typically don't use monsters that are around the CRs of between 12 and 17. And then anything that is CR 22 and above, the scaling for those is very specifically quite odd. If you look at the scaling of how leveling is for monsters of, the levels of a player versus a monster, those specific levels don't quite match up mathematically, and they provide some very unusual combats. And so I also don't use things that are very niche as well. Like I might not throw in a Planetar, for example. In most cases, you don't really need them. Or a God, you don't really need God monsters either. But most times what I will use a lot are dragons, giants, some sort of demons or devils, goblins, elementals, beasts, those sorts. And most of the adventures that I run tend to be tier 1 or tier 2. I do have experience running with tier 3 and tier 4, but most of the time, tier 1 and tier 2 tends to be a little bit more manageable in terms of like the expectations of like what people have a lot of fun with. Not to say that the other ones can't be fun, but a lot of people like to have that feeling of ascending difficulty, of getting stronger and having your character be a hero and going through the triumphs and tribulations of having a difficult time getting there. And typically by the time tier 3 or 4 comes around, either the game falls apart, unfortunately, or the game ends because the story just doesn't go that far. And so it just really depends. I've had about 3 campaigns that have made it all the way up to the tier 4 of play, which is like level 16 or 17 and above. But yeah, I won't use a lot of monsters that are extremely high levels or between 12 and 15. So, but anyway, binder. First, a drink. Okay. So, Dungeon Master binder. Whenever I buy a binder, I think I bought these from, like, not Costco. What's it called? Damn. Completely forgot. It'll come to me in a minute, but it's like one of the major like printing and office supply sellers. So it'll come to me in a moment, but typically what I look for in a binder is that it's got three rings, 1.5 to 3 inches. I prefer that the rings are those that are very resistant to being bent, because once they're bent, it's broken, because then you can't really get it back together. Also, I look to see that they have 2 holder panels, like 2 little panels in order to kind of store your stuff in the front and the back. I also buy like divider tabs, sheet protectors, of course, a bunch of paper, and I start to set up my notebook. And so typically what I put in here is I always have a lot of loose leaf paper in my binder. Even though I play the majority of my games online, a lot of the notes that I take actually during the session are written. I find that writing things down really cements ideas a lot better in your mind, and this is proven like neuroscience as well, than typing them out. And so I'll get a lot of stuff like this. Not that you can see it, but this is all notes from like one session that I took, probably the first or the second session. I will take notes about things that are relevant. Like this is a note that I took about how to do tragedy in a story element. And so things like this, where I need to reference old material that I maybe haven't mastered yet, I will keep in my pocket, especially as I am learning something new. So that's something that I have on the side. I also will keep printouts of various other things. For example, I have Lion's backstory in my pocket because I was referencing it a lot during the Of Goblins quest series. In fact, I still have to reference it every now and then. Other things I keep in my little tab are things like quick references for rules. Well, this is more for Indigo Isles, but since we're not doing Indigo Isles, we'll do it over here. It is the 6 levels of being drunk in Indigo Isles. I just moved it over to this one in case I needed it. And also things that are, I don't really want to pull out the book for. For example, the giant map of Rapanathik. Up in here. So essentially, things to keep in the pocket are things you're going to want quick reference for to pull out in the middle of a session without having to pull out like this big boy and having to look it up manually and just like having to pull a big chunky book to look for one page. It's a lot easier to pull out a single page that I've set up to the side and separated in a specific spot so I can reference very, very, very quickly as I need to. So this is what I call the Game Master's Toolkit. It's quick reference material that I can pull out that's of the physical kind. And then the stuff that I keep in the pages in the actual like clips themselves. Well, first, what I do with all of my adventures as a matter of Descent into Avernus, Indigo Isles, Rapanathik, is anything that I'm going to reference the book for, I print. And so the front, I have the Game Master's Guide to Rapanathik. I have several of the pages that I have, such as this is like Zelkor's Ferry, stuff on the Forest of Lost Hope. I have, let's see, hold on, let me keep turning. I have a player's guide. I have a lot of things that really relate to the beginning of the adventure, which we're actually moving past now, Castle Kalalan, whenever we were doing Castle Kalalan. I also highlighted, written in, and have really extensively studied the map, so that way whenever I play the games, I'm not shuffling like, oh, what is here, what is there? So I try to put in a good amount of time ahead of time in order to prepare for things and really study the things that I must know. Other things I have, of course, I have a section for all of the backstories that the characters have given me. And this is Gibbs. I have Ambrose's here as well. And then I have extra tabs in case I need to add things later. I have a whole tab related to supplies. Like if we're going to use alchemist supplies, I can very quickly bring it up because we have a character that will use these periodically. And that's everything I have in my Game Master binder. But to really just kind of bring it all together to tell you like what it is that you need to put, the things that you're going to reference often that you don't want to necessarily look up all the time, I would put in the folders because then you can just very quickly pull them out without having to open the snaps. And the thing that I would keep in the snaps is information that you're going to use pretty regularly, but maybe not all the time. I might want to reference like Ambrose's backstory, but it's not going to come up that often, so I just keep it in here, and I have the important parts highlighted so that way I can reference it when I need to. And then in the front, I keep the various different sections of the book or module that I'm going to run. If it's not a module that I'm running, I will have my notes for that session or what it is that the story is printed out and on there. And on some of my binders, I will sometimes, if there's a lot, especially if it's a brand new campaign, I have a to-do list that I print out and I put at the front. So that way I can prepare for the very first session, which requires a lot of work in order to have a really good first session. And I have a to-do list that I keep on the front. I add things to it, and I also cross things off as I do it. I also will do that periodically in the middle of campaigns as well, so that way I can keep myself organized and up to date on what it is that has to be done. Here's another example. Descent into Avernus. We'll open it up, and yep, there we go. I have the entire introduction for Descent into Avernus on a side tab Animancy Press had written our adventure for Baldur's Gate Free, which is our third marathon that we had this past winter. So kudos to you, Animancy, for writing this great adventure. So I have it on the side as opposed to in the binder because there's so many pages, and I've had to reference things back and forth so often that I'm like, I'm just going to keep it out of the book. So that's what's at the front. I have my notes from the session. Oh, that's really hard to see. And things I had to do at the front of the book, kind of like I said, I'll have to-do lists up at the front. I have a specific page set aside for how to play Baldur's Bones, which is a dice game that you can play in Baldur's Gate. And I have all my chapters in tabs, kind of like I would in a normal book. The reason for that is that I found it a lot easier in order to reference things in my binder than having an actual physical book. I also can get away with it looking like I know what I'm doing. I'm just kidding. I can get away with having a paper version rather than a hardcover version because it's just right here as opposed to like having my binder and also having a hardcover book over the top of that. Also, because it was a marathon, I didn't know where I was going to be. So I had every single chapter put into my binder as opposed to just one or two. And this is why. So I actually recommend if you are running a module to have two binders. And evidence number one, why? This entire binder is Jewel of the Indigo Isles. I don't want to have to carry this all around with me because the only things that are relevant are like that much material compared to the whole damn book, right? And so I don't want to have to carry this with me everywhere. I really only need like one chapter at a time. I only really need to things one page at a time. I don't need the whole thick big boy. So I keep Jewel of the Indigo Isles in here, and I will pull things out and have things in loosely paper during the session or in a binder all together to the side. So all in all, what I'm saying is keep yourself organized both digitally, physically, maintain an archive, and as you go, keep your notes all in one spot. Stay consistent with it because you're going to come to a point where, especially the longer that you game master, the more you're going to want to refine ideas for things you've already made. And you'll find that it is easier to refine what you have rather than reinvent an entire new wheel. Not that saying inventing something new isn't okay, but sometimes you might have an idea to improve something you had before better. And when you have a completely new group of players, they're not going to know that you ran it for another group of people 5-6 years ago, unless they tell them, of course. Is there a section that says, use Ambrose's sphere of frogs against him, make a frog his friend's brother? I have your backstory, for my part, completely written in there. Yes. Nothing about using fear of frogs. Well, actually, I did use Ambrose's sphere of frogs against him on purpose, with a foil rival. I don't think that it's a rival, an ally, a brother, someone to contend with, someone to really bring about Ambrose's qualities. Which in one of these series, I'm going to talk a little bit more about how you can use NPCs to exemplify and really define the character traits of certain player characters and kind of bring out their personalities, quirks, and backstory more with another character that matches correctly and, well, adjacently to what it is that they're doing. But that's more for another time. Okay, so what have I talked about? Talked about keeping yourself organized with archives of notes and how to do that with the system, and also a physical representation of a game master's binder. Let's see. Let's move on to the next topic. Branches of learning. So, before I go on, do you guys have any questions for, well, anything that is about organization or the way that I've organized my books or why I do things a certain way? Now's a really good time to ask, because the next thing I'm going to talk about is branches of learning, and we're going to leave the organization stuff a bit behind. Anyone from the YouTube or the Twitch side, or none of you have anything to ask, that is completely fine. No? Okay. All right, then, let's talk about branches of learning. So, all right. So, there are many different disciplines, many different fields of knowledge that people can learn from, and people will have different combinations of knowing and depths of different fields of this, which is what makes up a person's particular, I would say, like information to pull from for creating games or running games, which I, you know, currently also kind of like compared to having a game style. You can bring up this information to introduce into your games, and you use a lot of this understanding of your understanding of the world around you and how things are or have been in order to create things that are in your world. And so there are some people that know a great amount of a few things. There are some people that know a little bit of a lot. No matter where you're at, every dungeon master, I think that every dungeon master should take some time in order to research at least the basics of a few things, and then also spend time in mastery it and really learning a lot about the things that interest them most. For example, for me, my specific knowledge base is that I have a lot of neuroscience background. That comes with a lot of understanding the human anatomy and physiology, diseases, right? Like how to cure them, working in the hospital, like teaching at university level. I mean, things that kind of like relate to organization. All of those things are very specific skills or understandings that I've developed just by living the life that I have. Whereas someone that works like cleaning refrigerators will have like or not cleaning but repairing or building things like refrigerators or cars will have a completely different set of understandings, such as like mechanics, machinery, how things are kind of work together, the physics of that, right? How to repair things. That is a completely different field of study or discipline than what I have, and one is neither better nor worse than the other one. There's just things that we know. And so really it's these specific general buckets of things that people kind of know and different levels that kind of give a person a complete worldview of what they know, which kind of is very specific to them, in addition to like their own natural characteristics of personality that they developed growing up. A lot of this is what will make a game master play style or game master style way of running their games. And it's what they use in order to make their world, right? Because that's what they know, and so it only makes sense you're going to make things with what you know and not with things that you don't know, right? So but to go over the whole list of the disciplines, I'm going to say quite a lot here because there are quite many. There are, you know what, how about I show you rather than talk about it? Here, let's go to the side. Oop, let me move my tabs over. So we have social sciences such as archaeology, geography, history and anthropology, cultural ethnic studies, gender sexuality studies, psychology, sociology, economics, political science. There's the natural sciences, which include physics, chemistry, biology, earth sciences, space sciences, formal sciences such as computer science, systems science, professions such as medicine, agriculture, physical science, family consumer science, social work, public administration and public policy, law, journalism, media, library, museum studies, intelligence, military sciences, theology, engineering, architecture, design, transportation, business. There's the humanities, which include philosophy, linguistics, arts, literature, creative writing, religion, human history. And then there's the TTRPG related specific things such as monster ecology, the history of TTRPGs, including events and people of the past and the present, game development, game design, level design, all three different things. Different systems of TTRPGs, settings, lore, map making. There's two types, and then also two types of acting, which includes voice acting and traditional acting. And so all of these things are the different fields of studies or really disciplines that people can kind of delve into to a very extreme degree in order to kind of give them their unique understanding that they could use and draw from to develop their worlds. And so there's a lot of areas. I think that it's safe to say that it probably would be impossible for any one person to know the entirety of everything that there is. But rather, I think that even one profession like medicine can take decades of study and practice in order to know to a considerable degree, but only so much of it is really relevant for a game like Dungeons and Dragons, right? And so I think that the best advice here is to, one, like starting out, know what it is that you know. What do you know and what do you not know, and how much do you really know that thing? Because those areas are what you can leverage heavily in order to kind of build the worlds that you have and really add your own spin and personality to it. I will give you an example of mine. So I have used psychology and neuroscience a lot. In fact, I don't know if people really know that I do, but I have studied human mind, human brain quite consistently heavily here. And so I use that a lot in order to kind of really give very specific outcomes or feelings from my games to kind of get a very particular experience from what it is that players are getting from playing in that particular world. Rapanatic is an example of one. I have had also developed other things like Winter Dominion, which I haven't had a chance to stream it yet, but we will stream it this winter. I've also played other games where I've used leveraged my understanding of how people think or how people typically go about processing, understanding behavior in order to kind of use them in very social situations, like in game, with royalty, or rulers or evil BBEGs that are very manipulative and then still get the party to do what they want in the end. And so a lot of that stuff can be used pretty well if you know how to, and also kind of added depth that other people that don't have that knowledge can't, right? Because if you don't know what the thing is, you can't really use it. So I've also used my knowledge that I have of anatomy in order to kind of give very descriptive or very realistic outcomes to how creatures or people expire in game. They get unalived a lot, right? We like to do that quite a lot in D&D. So giving a gruesome outcome or description to things is something that I could do only because of my study of, human anatomy and physiology. Other things, so you also can get a wide knowledge base across many different fields to kind of get a good basic foundational understanding of how society even operates, right? And so I think I would dare say that a lot of us probably aren't kings and queens and rulers of a kingdom. So how would you know how one operates? I mean, you probably would have to study it, right? It probably doesn't come natural to you to know how that looks like, operates on a macro to a micro level, being able to develop an entire economy, much less a religion, factions, having things interact with each other, and knowing the outcome of how things would relate in history across various wars, how culture would kind of develop from that, how people kind of heuristically and also fundamentally interact with various different nuances of things like strife, or having to contend in things of conflict and how to resolve that, or what if you don't, then what? And so all of these things are small snippets of a greater part of a D&D game that people can use to kind of give additional depth to their games. And so it only benefits to know what these things look like or how they look like, and it only takes a little bit in order to build a lot from the little bit that you can learn. And so I do think that game masters, through the various stages that they are learning, at times are going to be actually to be forced to look stuff up at one point or another. I think that there is this common trope that goes around that never look at a game master's search history, because the things that they have to look up for their game sometimes, oh boy. I think that I'm one of those people that, it tends to get kind of weird sometimes. I will give an example of a couple of things that I wrote down. And so I don't know if Day is here, but if she is, she played a plasmoid named Mitsu. And for Astral Adventures, which is the name of the game, it's okay. Their character, which is a plasmoid, found the nuclear reactor and then consumed said nuclear reactor inside of themselves. And so I was like, I don't know what's going to happen. How does a nuclear reactor react to like the physiology of a plasmoid? So I had to look it up. I had to look up the physics of radiation in water, just to end up with like, yep, apparently the plasmoid is immune because it's water, right? Mostly water. And they instead became a very spicy punching bag. So anybody that touched them would get radiation damage and their teeth will fall out. Amazing, right? For Florida Simulator, oh, God. I ran a game called Florida Simulator. It is a trash fire and a half. I would not recommend going to look it up unless you're okay with extremely offensive content. It is very offensive, but also realistic. I had to look up things like what is the ecology and geographical makeup of Florida and why is it that the way that it is, so I can make very realistic looking maps. I also have to look up the history of Florida, both past and recent, which come to find out that in recent history, there are apparently in Southern Keys, Florida, drag queen gangs that had a shootout at Walmart over a wig sale. And so I, of course, had to make that one of the first sessions, shootout at Walmart. Look it up on YouTube if you like. It is hilarious. It's also, like I said, very offensive. So do not go looking for it unless you like that kind of like trashy humor. I had to look up stuff like how cyanide works to unalive people, spider anatomy, the expansive sciences of dementia. I've also had to look up how to make an at-home bomb using weird and unusual materials like fertilizer, salt, water, and other chemicals. So the list goes on. There's going to be things that I think dungeon masters are going to be curious about, and I think I would really fully support people going on their curiosity binges in order to learn something, because then you can take that information and use it to put in your games. And then once you've kind of practiced it once, it's kind of like, it's going to be up here. So you can just pull it out whenever during other sessions years down the line. And so all of that information just really helps in order to kind of improve improv. Improv is the thing that we're not going to really touch until way later, because that's something that goes, I think, beyond the basics. But having a fundamental understanding of what the world is, our world, and understanding it well really gives you a good basis of how to use that in your fantasy games, and also how to alter it so that you can alter the physics of things, as you have things like magic. And well, really, it's a fantasy world, so you could do whatever the heck you want. But you know how things work, so you know how to use it to then make it work in a way that it's not supposed to work. And thus, like breaking the physics of real world, but in game, and actually having a really cool, unique twist on how things would not work, if that makes sense. But regardless of where it is that people do end up with their fields of study, I think that there is a list of things that I believe all dungeon masters should, at the very least, benefit a lot from kind of like doing some basic research. And they're things that we use all the time without us knowing. Kind of like I mentioned, when we have to make cities, break them physics. Yes, Lion, break them physics. I think that there are a lot of fields of study that we use all the time without us realizing that we do it. For example, if I'm going to build a world, I'm going to build any world. There's several things I have to make for it, right? I need to make a city. There's got to be people in that city. I need to make a dungeon. I need to make a world. There has to be physics for this world, and there has to be, maybe, hopefully, maybe not, but there could be some sort of gods ruling this world. There has to be some sort of conflict, some sort of rise to action that really brings a hero out of their home to do the things that they do. All of those things require a lot of sub information in order to create and pull from in order to create something, right? And so without us realizing, we've been exposed to a lot of media, film, books, music, things that we really like, things that we don't like, things that we've seen, people that we've met. We have examples to reference in our mind already. We have a collection of things that we pull from to be like, yes, this is going to be my fantasy setting that I'm going to make. And you didn't just pull that from nowhere. You have a reference of what it is that is. And so I really am stressing with a lot of importance that these things that I'm about to list are things that are going to help a lot in anyone's games. And it only takes a little bit of know-how of what these things are, and memorizing it and really fundamentally practicing it in order to expand your repertoire immensely. So Uh, but that list, in no particular order, I was just kind of putting it all on the list, is history and anthropology. So knowing the historical events of our world, um, and how it is that people have interacted together or interacted each other, and even like current day, and knowing how that very complex system of what people have done and who people are and what it is that has occurred really helps out a lot understanding and having a very basic structure or basic understanding of how culture is and how people interact. I think that some very popular time periods, of course, be Renaissance, anything Greek, Roman, all that. Those are some very popular ones that people look at quite intensely. I think that the Enlightenment period is also a pretty good one. The Industrial period is also a great one as well. There's a lot of good periods that you can look at for a lot of really, for a lot of people that have made a lot of differences in the world that you can use and then develop them to be a BBEG. I think that we probably, I don't know if people here know about it or read about the story of Abraham Lincoln being a BBEG in someone's game. I saw it on some Reddit post some years ago. I thought it was absolutely fantastic. Whoever made that game, kudos to you. It was quite unique. I liked it. Two, psychology. Understanding how people think, how people interact with each other, how people view themselves, how people live throughout life, and knowing how it is that people deal with certain things, and also how people end up with certain mental problems, how people have certain mental setbacks, and how they kind of like come over those things, because understanding that really builds up your understanding of what it is that makes a person a person. And so then you can make greater depth NPCs, you can make better BBEGs, you can understand your players intentions a lot better and understand them to a fundamental level of what it is that they're really trying to do. And if things happen, you can be a lot more understanding of what it is that's going on. And so I didn't really and I do mean this, like whenever I took my beginner psychology courses in college, like it really blew my mind, like how different I really viewed my games. And it just takes a little bit to really understand and really see things differently, and also understand yourself. I mean, there's a lot to be said psychology, and I think that that is the ones that I think people should definitely look into, and to try to understand just a little bit more, so you can understand people just that much better and make your games is that much more hardcore. The next thing is literature, looking at a lot of examples of what people have made, particularly the classics. I mean, Shakespeare, right, is one, and also things that are more modern day. Like I know that looking and analyzing and understanding the Lord of the Rings is probably a popular one, right? But also can be other things, right? Like it could be like Aragon. I mean, just like having examples of things that people have written and understanding the themes, and remember, and really truly breaking it down to understand like what is it that makes this book great, and what is it that makes it fantastical? What is it that people really love about it? What is it that this author is bringing in on a critical analysis level of the literature? Because those kind of like very niche understanding of the various topics can be used in order for you to create literary rhetoric, and to like put these things out like on the fly, and really understand like what is rhetoric and how to put those things in your speech and the way that you like pace things and the things that you put in your stories, so that way whenever people look back at it, or whenever people are in the moment, or you have a group that's really engaged, kind of see that switch go off in their head, and it's really noticeable. I think that like one example of this that I can think of really well is, I don't know what episode it was, but hold on, it was Critical Role, which I don't normally watch a lot of Critical Role. I watch some things, but there was an episode in the first season where I don't know what his name is. He was playing the guy that shoots the guns with the white hair. You guys are gonna hate me. I really don't know the characters as well as some of y'all do. But he Mercer was role playing one of the nobles. And there was something that he said in the context of the situation that was going on that you kind of see in the background that the voice actor he said kind of pricked up. You can kind of see that there was like this, like, wait, what just happened moment of like what is going on, and like really kind of like digging into like a person's understanding of a situation for them to read into it really hard. And from what I know, I think that that voice actor in particular, he's got a lot of Vampires of the Masquerade. I know that some of y'all have been talking about that a lot lately. Grace, I'm looking at you, and Dr. Squigs. And so, you know, kind of like knowing fundamental things about your players and then trying to put things in a frame that is perfect for that person and really bring some great things out of people, which it did bring up some really good roleplay. And they continue to have really, really good roleplay and really good understanding of like the world and them interacting with it. And so literature, read it, understand it, know how to write it works. Creative writing is another one. It is a skill. It is a skill that takes time. It's like a muscle. Gotta practice. Writing is going to be the one thing that's going to help solidify people to really create fantastical worlds, and practice. Practice really will build your skills, especially when you practice with things that you just learned, whether it's from history, anthropology, psychology, or literature, or anything else that you've learned. And putting it all together to make something great, to make something new. And so, yeah, definitely practice writing. Philosophy is another great one. A lot of the BBEGs that I think that newer DMs tend to put out are, and this is not a bad thing, definitely not a criticism of any sorts, but they tend to be very, what's a good word to put it? They lack a little bit of depth. And then I also see, like, as people kind of like learn more about this battle between good and evil, and kind of like go through some repetitions and kind of like start to learn and conceptualize these things over several conflicts in game, a game sometimes too. They learn stuff in real life, they read things, they start to develop characters that are a little bit more realistic, quote unquote. Really digging into things like existentialism, or like really dig into like different sort of philosophical views in order to characterize the actions of different types of factions, people, backgrounds. And those are the things that really add a lot of depth, and also tend to be very black, and not be very black and white. They tend to be a lot of gray. And there have been points even in games that I ran where I use a lot of philosophy, and the characters would question often, are we the bad guys? In fact, I think I see it happen quite a bit in Rapanatic, where they're like, are we evil? No. Or like in Indigo Isles, I think they said that a lot jokingly, only because they would intentionally do evil things, and so that's different. But definitely not knowing what side you're on, and if you're doing good or bad, is a good twist to throw at people, because the people that are out to do good tend to realize that, hey, they're hurting people too, right? And that does come at a price of some sorts. So things aren't always black and white. Sometimes they are pretty gray, and actually most things are. But I think presenting it in a game can be quite challenging, but it is doable. So that is one way that people can accentuate or really add a lot of depth to their games. The next three are, like I said before, they're different topics, but they kind of are in the same realm. Game development, game design, and level design. Three entirely different things. And so game development doesn't necessarily have to do with just TTRPGs. It can be about video games, as can the other topics. But that refers to the development of a game, including its mechanics, and how to create something from beginning to end, including stuff like playtesting, which for me, Lion and Matt, they're both now starting to learn this playtesting portion, which I'm not sure that we've done very much, but I did some playtesting in some of my games previously quite heavily, such as like Winter Dominion, and also games like God's Petulance and the Ooze Grottos, the Shells and Roses of the Necrodancer. All of those I have practiced, like learning how to playtest and how to put particular things down so that I can get information and use that in order to change my games and make them better for future iterations. That is a very different skill, because you're having to kind of break the mold intentionally and insert things that are meant to not be fun, because you're trying to see how people are going to react to it, knowing that it's not the best thing to put there, but you're looking for data, not for not for a intended outcome or purpose. It's more research related. Game design is, well, putting things together in order to fit a particular field. So like if I'm trying to make Rapid Ethic, I'm probably going to, if you guys have seen it, it's got a lot of red, it's got a lot of black, it's got a lot of milk. And so I got to have this blend of putting serious and very absurd things and mashing them together and making it work. And that's not easy. And you got to design the UI, you got to design the game, the mechanics, the field, the characters, the story. Everything has got to be put together in a way so that it makes sense and it can continue forward without it feeling like it's all clunky or just not fitting together. And that can be very difficult. Level design has to do with the actual creation of the space that characters or players kind of play around in. More specifically, I mean maps, dungeons. Knowing what a red herring is, or how to create labyrinths, and also how to create and manipulate the environment in a visual way so that you could subconsciously send people the way that you want them to go, either as a trap or as a way to show them the way forward, is a skill. And also how big, what shape, what the different things are, those all make a very big difference in creating a map for a level. And so understanding that even just a little bit will enhance people's maps to a great degree. It really, like, that's one of the things. If you're gonna use a lot of maps, like for VTTs, level design is gonna be good for you. And the last thing that I think all GMs should really kind of put a bit attention to is look at other systems other than 5e. That's going to be an unpopular opinion, but there's a lot more systems out there than you think. And a lot of them can be fun. Some of them can be not fun. And in fact, knowing why they're not fun is also just as important as knowing what does make something fun. Also knowing, like, to what kinds of people is this system fun for versus who is it not fun for, and really understanding the audience of the people and like understanding the culture of these various groups that you kind of like tend to run into, because people have different fields of interest when it comes to TTRPGs. Like, why is it that someone really loves Vampires of the Masquerade versus why is it that same person might hate Pathfinder 1e? Because they're fundamentally very, very different, but a person can like both, right? But what is it specifically that makes Vampires of the Masquerade versus Pathfinder 1e, and understanding their flaws, their pros, and then also the mechanics, because then you could take that no matter what system you're using and then create something new in the thing that it might be. And so then I could make for example, in 5e, I could then drop in a Lich that knows all of the spellcasting mechanics of Pathfinder 1e, but the only way that I'm going to know that is by having researched it and known it, because then I can drop it on the fly without having to have a huge textbook go like, how do I do this? Again, it's just things that make games better and add a lot of variance that anyone can just do a little bit of work, understand how things work across systems so that you can make your games better. Okay, I have said quite a bit. Before I get to the last few parts, because there's still two more parts to this, I'm going to take a little bit of break. I'm going to take my dogs outside because Terezi wants to go take a break. Yes, doggy, I hear you. And I'll be back in about 5 minutes to talk about how to prepare for your first session and how to start out making your first world as a game master. And believe it or not, this is a lot of talk and a lot of information, but I consider these to be just the basic foundations. I will be back in about 5 minutes. Don't go anywhere. We'll be back soon. All right. Hello, everybody, and I am back. Okay. So, if this is your first time on the channel, hello, welcome. My name is Paladin, and we're doing a lesson on game mastering for the Game Mastering Academy. This is going to be the first of many, many, many videos and iterations of me talking about how to master game mastering. And there is a lot that goes into it. In fact, I think all of the things that I've talked about so far really don't have to do, well, I'd say that they have a lot of foundational aspects to prepare oneself to really master the art of a skill. So I talked about how to organize one's thoughts and create a system organizational to keep things archived over time, as well as how to organize one's physical resources as well. I also talked about, just recently, the different branches of learning that game masters can go into in order to maximize and increase their depth of understanding to make their games good to great to then exceptional. So continuing on, there's two more topics I want to talk about, and as I'm going through these, please feel free to ask any questions that you like. This is a time for learning, and if you guys want to know something particularly specific, then feel free to throw it on down and I will answer your questions as soon as I get to a stopping point. Continuing on, I want to talk about how exactly, as a brand new game master, are we going to prepare for our first session. And so I think that whenever people are learning a new skill, they should proceed forward with about an 80% of a skill level of what it is that they currently know. And so at first, I think it would make a lot of sense that if people have never created a world before and then ran a world from a world they've never created before, right? So they don't have the knowledge of how to make a world because they've never done it before, that they should prepare and run an adventure from one that is already made for them. I mean, it only makes sense that, you know, if I've never made something myself, maybe using something that is made and has got an easier flow and understanding for me to use and utilize for running a game would make a lot of sense to use that instead. And so a good example is, like, you know, maybe taking something short, like a one-shot, maybe a small or short adventure, like Dragons of Stormwreck Isle, Mines of Fendelver. Those are great adventures to start out with, right? You can read through the text, prepare for your first session, and run it using the material that's there as a story or a baseline. So I would definitely lean heavily towards that as a starting brand new dungeon master. And the things that I would really prepare for in that instance is I would do well to understand what it is that makes the world that it is. So I would look at the text and look at it. What is the sequence of events that a dungeon master and a player has to go through in order to naturally lead them to the next thing and then to the next thing? Things like plot hooks, which are what leads a player to kind of go in a direction of a story, call to action, and then go through the conflict or the challenge that they have to go through in order to get to the next plot or to get to the ending of something. Those are the things that I think a dungeon master should kind of be into when doing the first adventure, and really focus heavily on how it is and why it is that things are structured and put in the sequence that they are. And I think that when preparing for that, having, you know, like if I had printed out my adventure, highlighting it, writing it, taking notes, on a piece of paper, and then doing that for the entire, I would say, like first chapter at the very least. And then also the very beginning of what it is that comes at the beginning of the next chapter would be the very least that one could prepare for. If doing a longer module, I think that a lot of the longer modules have a lot of context at the front or at the back that make really good reference material for people to use in the role play and the structure and the building of how things play out. I would maybe lean away from those. And so examples would be like Storm King's Thunder, which has got a lot of social intrigue and a lot of build-up. Things like Descent into Avernus, which again, it requires a lot of lore learning, and especially when it comes to Baldur's Gate. It's about like a 60-page or 70-page reference in the very back of the book in and of itself. I would stay away from those and lean more towards things that are smaller, easier, localized. Order of the Dragon Queen could be a good one if you want a little bit more of a challenge. If maybe you've been a player for a while and you want something with a little bit less training wheels, that could be a good one. The Mines of Phandelver original is a great one, but there's also the Shadow of the Obelisk, I believe is what it's called, that also can be used as the expanded version of the Mines of Phandelver that recently came out. You can also use that as well. It's got a longer adventure, but it does include that very simple first part that we all are very keen and used to. I think that those would make great entries for a dungeon master to hone in on and really understand the basic fundamentals of what is an adventure, which is really three things, right? You got a place for players to have a little bit of social interaction and meet each other, which then goes into some sort of situation or event that causes them to head over to a call to action and go towards the conflict, which could be a dungeon. Typically it's a dungeon. Going through the dungeon, going through the rooms, heading into some fights, fighting a boss, getting some treasure, and then having a lot of exploratory and also resolve at the end of the adventure. And so it involves typically, like at the very minimum, three things. You need a town, a dungeon, and reward. Three things. And it can be very simple. It doesn't have to be anything expansive. They could meet at a bar, at a tavern. You set up a tavern. If you want to make your own tavern, you can. If you meet at a tavern, give them a quest that's, hey, like, there's these goblins that are really messing things up in the local farms. Great. Have them go to the goblin dungeon. Go through the goblin dungeon, return back, get the reward. Very simple. And so it doesn't have to be anything extremely nuanced. It doesn't have to be anything extremely in-depth in terms of like characterization or personalization. It can't just be something as simple as that. But I do think that having these pre-made adventures that do add a little bit more depth than just that do give more fundamental understanding than just creating your own simple 3-part dungeon. And I don't think there's any shame in it either. I've seen some people kind of drive away from using modules, not wanting to use them or play them because they just don't like them. And I think that's okay. But I do think that there's also a lot to say in using the resources that are available to you so that way you can learn from them and learn a lot. Because it stands to reason that the things that I've made from like professional game designers that people love and use are things that you can pull a lot from. And yes, it does mean that you might have to sit down and really study and learn what it is that the adventure is, which I know some people don't like that. Fair. But there's a lot that you can pull from it. And then, as you kind of ease into knowing what to expect from modules, then pretty much are set and not really necessarily needing them. But from a first session perspective, I definitely would key into getting a basic module, a very short one, learning what it is the step and the sequences are and ways it is that things are framed the way that they are, and trying to understand that what it is that is pulling characters through this narrative to the end and the conclusion of it. And as you go session to session, getting through the story, honing in on your presentation of the story, how the players and their characters are interacting with the story, and how it is that they went from point A to point B to point C, and how they have resolved certain obstacles or challenges. You might find that the things that you assume people would do are not the things that people tend to do. In fact, I think that there is a lot of truth in saying that there is such a thing as over preparing, but there also is such a thing as under preparing. And so, how much do you really prepare for an adventure? So, I think whenever you do come upon your first session or any session in particular, having a good idea of 3 plot points or 3 things that you expect to happen in that session is something that would really benefit you, so that you have a clear direction of where it is you want the characters to go, or where the characters should go, especially if it's a module. I mean, it's very consistently modular that you can know where the next reference point is. And I think like some tips that I would give is, if you see that a group of players is stuck at a certain plot point, if it's in a dungeon, you could just very easily move it along to the next one, because a pacing has a lot to do with how fun a game is, and it isn't necessary to go through every single room or part of an adventure in order to have fun. In fact, you can very easily, if you see that, that a certain group of players is stalling or just stuck or just really not having fun with the current environment that they're in, push them on up to the next plot point. There's no shame in that. In fact, I think that that's something that I see a lot of professionals do in the higher levels, is that they know when to push their players along to the next point, and that in doing so, you end up preserving the feeling and the experience that you're wanting from the game and the players. So that's something that you can do. But typically, what I do, like I said, before my session, I write down the 3 things that I expect to really get through in that session. And there have been times where none of those things happen. One good example is in a Rapid game here recently. I thought they would go to the Tunnels of Terror. Come to find out that they went to a completely different dungeon in a completely different part of the world that I was not prepared for. And hooey, was that something. But sometimes players can do that, and there has to be some understanding that there is a 2-way relationship in what it is the DM is prepared, what the DM is capable of, and what the players want to do. Like, I think that it is okay sometimes to say, especially as a new DM, to be like, hey, I didn't prepare that part of the map, and I prepared this part for this session. Let me do that instead. And I think a lot of saying that comes from a form of 2 places of, like, one, knowing your limitations. If you know that running that part of the adventure is, you just don't know it well, or you haven't looked at it, just okay, or you're not comfortable with looking at things that you're not necessarily prepared for, that is an okay thing to tell people. I think that's something that I see in a lot of newer game masters, is almost like a need to prove that they are good. The fact is that you're not good. Probably you're not good at anything that is new, and that's normal. I mean, I think that it is a lot better to have humility in understanding one's skills and being honest, because when you're honest with people about your capabilities, your strengths, your limitations, you really do reach a better level of trust with the players that are, well, with anyone that is around you, and not overinflating your skills, because that could only lead to, well, a lot of potential disaster. I mean, if you promise something and then people can very clearly tell that you're just not that, or you are overinflating with lack of evidence, and then you lead a really bad session, it can only look badly as a perspective on you, and that could seem like a person has a lack of understanding on their skills, or that they were not necessarily truthful in ascribing the things that they thought they knew. And sometimes it can be hard to know exactly what it is that you are good at, to what degree. Like there's various different degrees that come to levels of expertise. Like there is not knowing what you don't know and not knowing how good or bad you are. And at that level, it can be really dangerous to make any sort of claims at being good at something we don't know what it is quite yet. And sometimes it does take a couple of iterations of watching other people, or having been a player yourself across different dungeon masters, to have a reference of what that is. And all it is reference points of like, what is good? What does great look like? And understanding what your skill compared to that is. And so, again, I just think that being truthful in where one is on their journey of skill is something that will get a lot of trust with you and other people, especially as a newer dungeon master. It is a pitfall that I see people fall into in many different parts of life. It doesn't have to be just dungeon mastery. I mean, in neuroscience, in medicine, in nursing, in school, in jobs. I mean, people all over the place really, really try hard to try to prove themselves, but the proof will come in time. And the period right now between starting out at a new skill and getting the experience, learning things day by day, repetition, session by session, is only going to come with practice, meaningful practice, which is something that we'll talk about in a later learning session. But I do think that it is okay to understand that right now, like, yes, I'm wanting to play a game and I'm wanting to participate as a role as a game master, but I'm also learning to do this thing that I've never done before. And it is a lot of different skills that you got to put in together to run a fantastic session. And it does take practice. It doesn't, for some people, it does come pretty well and easy in order to run those kind of things. I think that I would say for most people, it doesn't. My first couple of sessions for me, I remember that they were absolutely horribly trash. I thought that any sort of one was a crit fail, regardless of what die it was. Come to find out, of course it's not, right? You roll a 1 on a d6 doesn't mean that it's a crit fail. And so every time I saw red on roll 20, I'd be like, oh yeah, that's a crit fail. Nope. I didn't have any point of reference of what it is game mastering was, because I had never seen someone game master before. It was right when D&D 5e came out, and I was like, oh boy, look, I don't know anyone that's going to DM, so I'm just going to learn how to DM myself, because that sounds amazing. I want to make my own world. And I had no one to tell me how to do that. I had no one to mentor me and show me how it is to make a world, or what is role play, or how to do this or that. I had to learn a lot in the beginning years through trial and error, and a lot of brute force of like, I'm going to learn this thing and I'm going to be good at it because I love it. And I have fun doing it. And now here I am, like 12 years later, now talking about all of this to all of you. So if the first couple of tries doing something are painful, you're not alone. I think that there are a lot of people that have bad sessions, and I think there's a lot of people that have good sessions as well. There's going to be good, there's going to be bad. You can't have one without the other, especially if you're learning something brand new. What matters is your perspective in terms of you in relation to what is that this time period is, which is a period to learn. Yes, you're trying to have fun. And I think that you can learn and have fun at the same time. There are also going to be those days where you meet, maybe sometimes you might meet a group of players or a group of people that don't have your best intentions in mind, or they create problems, especially like interpersonal problems at the table, away from the table. And they can, and I have seen experiences like that, just completely destroy like a person's willingness to learn something. And I think that this is just me. I think that one of the worst things that can happen to someone is they succeed well for a long time without failure. I think that having some form or some sort of like, hey, like I'm not as good as this is good, because then you know what to improve on. No one is perfect first time they try anything. And trying to improve towards mastery takes a lot of time. Hi, Solid, welcome. And so if you're not good at the first time you try dungeon mastery, the second time, the third time, and you just have this expectation, it could be that maybe you have a really high expectation of yourself. You know, I think that's great. But I think what really matters is that you kind of have a lot of forgiveness towards your own skills, and that you say to yourself that, you know, this sucked, and that's okay, because this is time for me to learn. It's a time for me to get the skills that I need, so that way I can be really good or great at this thing. And it does take going through some of those periods of like not having a great day or not having a good session to learn a lot, because you can learn a lot from the negative, sometimes even more than you can from the positive. And asking people for feedback about your sessions really helps immensely as well. Anyway, all I'm saying with all of this is you might suck at first, and that's okay. And to have some forgiveness for yourself and to go forward preparing for your first sessions and running your first sessions, knowing that you're learning and you're brand new to this thing. And if you do, or if you are one of those people that has a really, really bad experience, I'm sorry, you know, that happened, but also know that you're not alone. There's a whole community of people that have experienced the same thing. And I think that any game master that has done this for a while probably would agree when I say just keep trying. It does get better. And the only time you ever truly fail is if you quit. Because then there's nothing, right? Like you dropped it all. And so if you really enjoy D&D, really enjoy the aspect of game mastering and making a world, keep going. It really does get better. And also, if it's largely caused by the people that you're playing with, probably try to find a new people that'll be a little bit more supportive and understanding of you and what it is you're trying to do. And sometimes it does take a change in your environment to really get a better feel of what to do and how to go forward. That's all. So, but anyway, preparing for your first session, that is it. So the next part that I want to talk about is how to go about creating your first world. So let's say that you've already ran a couple of sessions. So by this point, you've already ran a couple of sessions, you ran through a module, and maybe this is the point that you're at as a game master where you are past the very, very, very basics at the start, or maybe you're a player that has played for a while and you are wanting to pick up something that, you know, maybe a module is not really what I want to do, because I don't think that it'll be challenging. Maybe you have like a really high threshold of like needing like intellectual processing, and so you want to make something instead. Completely fair. You can completely skip having to do the module and just go into making your own world. And so where do you start as a new game master, and how do you know what to develop in what sequence? And this is kind of where a lot of the information that I kind of brought up before of the different branches of learning and the different learning levels that you can have in the different disciplines will kind of come into play. Because anything that you're just kind of creating, you're pulling that from yourself, from nothing, from things that you've read, experienced, that you love, that you don't love, that you know really well, right? You can't really make something from something that you don't know. It doesn't make sense, right? So you would have to pull from a lot of different references in order to make a world, especially if it's going to be a big world, right? If you're going to make a world complete with gods, factions, people, culture, commerce, different sorts of monsters, dungeons, conflict, war, culture, philosophy. These are all things that are very advanced, but you don't have to have all of those things. In fact, you probably can start with just a very few things. And so something that I would definitely recommend is, as a beginner, having some sort of guide in order to kind of help you develop this world. And so I definitely think that the Gygax 785 challenge is something that I would definitely prefer to people that are just making their first ever world. So Gary Gygax had, back in 1975, had an interview where he was talking about how to make a really good world. And apparently, I think the information was lost for a while, and then someone had found it again and turned it into a PDF, which is free, does not cost anything to download. And it's a 5-week, week-by-week guide on how you can go making your world. And so I think that this is probably one of the best things that I can offer. And I think that it'd be something that we could do together, although not this week. So if you are in a position where you're like, hey, I've already DM'd a couple of times and I want to make my own world and kind of practice on it, there you go. Or if you're a new DM and you've had a lot of experience as a player and wanting something that will stimulate you intellectually and skip the module entirely, again, this is something that'll help a lot with creative writing. And there is really no limit or bounds when it comes to how complicated of a world you make. But what I would suggest, kind of like I was saying before, there is such thing as over preparing as there is under preparing. So how much do you want to make? At the very least, start with the big overall picture of your world, and then narrow down to the very smallest local area that your group is going to start out in. It's not necessary to write about all 6 countries of lore for your world. Neither might it be relevant to write about all the lore for the country that your world is starting in for the player's perspective. But it is really relevant for them to at least have the local environment of the city and the town that they're going to start out in, plus the immediate local surrounding areas made, so that way they know what it is that they're going to be getting into, and you have some point of reference to build from and expand outward from. And what you'll realize is that over time, as you are adventuring in this world, you're going to add things to it, and your players are also going to add their own information to it from their backstory, the decisions that they make, the NPCs that they really attach to, the stories that they really like. And so you need to leave enough room for your characters or the players to add to the world as much as you are adding to it. Having a world that is too well made really adds a lot of restrictions. And so you want to have things be specific enough, but leave enough room to add, and add quite a bit, right? And so that is what I recommend for starting an adventure. Big general overview of the world. You can name the different continents. You don't necessarily have to give the lore on the specific continent that you're in. Maybe name some of the gods, some of the factions. Don't go into super depth of what it is that's going on in the interrelations, and start from the base foundation of where they're starting out. Players can only handle so much information being thrown their way. And I think one thing that I see commonly, that I've seen a lot, especially on things like Roll20, where you can include a lot of lore of your world in the game listing, is that there's a lot of data dump of 20 pages of information about the world. And it's just a lot to read through. I mean, we have to think about through the perspective of this person I'm going to play with is experiencing this world for the first time. Their character might know a lot of this information, but the player is playing the character. You have to understand that there is a connection and that you can't have one without the other. Restrictions unclear. Make it single dungeon for 75 years looking for Gygax. My players added communism to my world. Help read my 75-page Gygax manifesto before playing. Oh my god, Lion. But the point I'm trying to make is that your players are gonna essentially learn the lore as you play it and as you give it to them in game. So having all of this backstory helps you as a dungeon master coordinate a skeleton or a plot point with hooks, to get them from one point to the other. But you're not restrained to follow that exactly. In fact, you can go off rail at any point and they could just completely go somewhere else entirely, right? And so your players are going to learn the world as they live it. So having this huge document to just, here, read this, it really, it doesn't help the players as much. In fact, I could promise that your players will probably have a lot more fun with a very basic understanding of the world. 2, 3, 4, maybe 5 paragraphs, right? At most. And have them learn the rest as they go. That makes it easier for you, makes it easier for them, and you can add stuff to it as you go. And that's all I got for today and the basics of lesson 1, just foundations. So I think that today, we talked about organizational methods of how to keep your information in one spot, developing a system, archiving, referencing those things later, updating your archive as you go, the different branches of disciplines and learning that one can go to or go through to understand and enhance their games with, learning how to prepare for your first session, a little know-how about being okay with starting out as a new DM, and if things don't go well, it's going to be okay, just keep going. And then a supplementary resource that you can use in order to develop your first world. And so as a project of this entire, what has it been, 2-hour video, here's what I want you to do. I want you to create your system of note keeping. Get your resources, tab them, get yourself prepared for your first session, get yourself organized in order to reference material quickly, right? Get yourself organized, because luck favors the well prepared, and so having all of these things ready will only make your life easier, and you want things to be easier, not harder, right? And so make things as easy for yourself as possible later, and then you have to do less work in order to look stuff up or find things. And also pick a couple of basic fundamentals to start adding to a list to learn about. And if you don't remember what they are, I will just read them out real quick. They include things like history and anthropology, psychology, literature, creative writing, philosophy, game development, game design, level design, and different systems. I would say pick one. Start getting a learning list ready for yourself, and just start digging in to what it is that is available, like for us, or what has happened in our world, so that you can then use that in your games as a reference. And that is really it. That's all I got. I think, oh no, did everything just like disconnect and connect? Okay, that's annoying. I'm back. So what I was saying is that I am going to restart the stream, and I'm going to take a little break for myself first to get something to drink. And when I come back, I'm going to be making maps for Rapinathic. I'll be in a VC in a private Discord server, and I will see you all in about 5 to 10 minutes. This was a great pleasure talking about the basic fundamentals of how to master game mastering, and there is a lot more to come. It's going to be weekly, same time, 9 a.m. Central, which is 10 a.m. Eastern. And so I will see y'all in 5 to 10 minutes, or if you just came here for the game mastering portion, that is okay. I'll see y'all next week, and have a good one.